The Cooper Union Players presents The Politics of Destruction.
We should get started. We have a lot to go through today, and I want to get finished by 1.
We should keep in mind for our discussion today, I thought the materials were very well prepared, very thoughtfully prepared. I took special note of the shutdown scenario. I thought the materials were very well prepared. A lot of things have to work with our main operating plan. It's very highly disputed and can lead to a bad outcome in a couple of years. The shutdown is really the reinvention of Cooper Union because we can actually start accumulating money so that we have an opportunity and resources. What's our plan for the 21st century? How can we do this with a clean slate? I highly appreciate that.
I think at this point, Jim Shed isn't really looking at the shutdown scenario. I think the idea of putting it in the faculty's hands is the right thing to do. It sort of makes them come to realize tuition has to be part of the solution. So, the game plan is to have them realize and accept the fact that tuition is part of the solution. I don't see them coming back with any other plans. It is on the table.
So closure is on the table?
Closure is on the table.
How much does it get fleshed out? And when does it get fleshed out?
We're going to have an obligation to the students. We're transferring the acceptance letters. Basically obligate us to a 4-year full tuition scholarship for 4 years. Except they don't get financial aid in the forms of grants, essentially. They might have to claim for tuition against us. I don't know if that's factored into the shutdown solution. Acceptance letters have been reviewed by an independent law firm and basically say, welcome. We will extend to you a full tuition scholarship for 4 years. That's something that we will change going forward. Not this year, obviously. But if we accept the class of 2013, that would be modified to give us flexibility. But the ones that have gone out to date have essentially promised 4 years. It's enough to claim against, certainly.
Part of the plans, Richard, the closure plans, was the 3-year plans and we basically fleshing out the 2.
Right, and back to that question. Whether you really end the school in the 3rd year with just the seniors there, and who would hang around? What faculty would hang around? These are the issues we have to look at.
Yes, there are issues with the closure plan as well, but it's thoughtful and the only real way to reinvent the school because the other plan has baggage and John should spend all this time with this very limited range of ideas that he can move because he's constrained by the things that we all understand he's constrained by.
I would support an earlier rather than later fleshing out of the shutdown plan because, CUNY.
Even if we don't think that's an optimum plan, that's more of the implied threat that's out there right now. Or else we're gonna end up in a position in December to say, well, School X didn't meet its plan. John Shed said that we're going to shut it down. What exactly does that mean? We have no idea. We don't know how we're gonna run it out, so I think we really, in the next 4 months, need to be fleshing something out.
Jim Shutt has been talking about this. You can't take 3rd-year students and have them transfer somewhere. They can't transfer to graduate from another place. Hi, Dan. We've been having a problem here with the phone system. But the 3rd-year students can't transfer to another school to graduate with 1 year. The place won't even take them. So, he's well aware of it and he's working on a plan. We can question him about it later.
The closure option to me still presents an opportunity that I don't think we've really looked at. I've always thought if you close a place down and you start with a clean piece of paper, and you say, how can we build a school for $30 million a year in operating costs with the same free tuition that it's always had? It seems to me that it could be a very interesting place with science and art for $30 million a year instead of 50. If you do that, you start fresh with a new Cooper Union and you invent with the same principles that existed for 100 years. I don't know if that's really ever been looked at. It's all we're modifying this, or we're going to change this. But if you close it down, you really ought not to assume that tuition is the only solution to the problem. You could build a school for $30 million, I think, and you ought to be able to. I don't think that's been pursued sufficiently. And the other piece of it, the other thing I don't know if we're done looking at with, is the idea of partner, either a merger partner for a part of the school, or something, or someone could buy out the engineering school, for example. I mean, NYU bought out Polytech. I mean, it's been done. If we're going to close down a school, I'd rather see it sold to somebody who wants an engineering presence in New York. It keeps the students on track and retains faculty and has some value. Maybe these things are being looked at, and I'm just not aware of it, but I just want to explore enough of the options before us.
Look, we spoke about that report, and a question I have still is, if someone would buy the school, would they be obligated to have the same issues that we have that make it difficult to change? Unions, tenures, the problem that Stan was mentioning before. And I don't know who would step into that position.
Maybe nobody, but I don't know if we've really explored it. Stanford was interested in getting into New York City and bid on a project. Maybe they could lease some of this building for some period of time, and we retain the option to take it back with 3 or 5 years' notice if we at one point develop a new school they would want to get back into. I mean, there's a lot of things that I can think of that are a little off the wall, but we're in a pretty desperate situation, and I hate to start accepting, well, that's it, this is the only way we're going to move forward, unless somebody really shows me that what we've looked at is the whole range of options, and we've explored them thoroughly.
My guess is that the pushback might be, well, how many balls, if you know what I mean, can you have in the air at the same time? I think he does have limited bandwidth to do all those things at once. I think the focus is, let's go through with the faculty discussion and see if we can get to a point where we can see all 3 of the schools survive. And if he can't, I think we will follow the other plans. But I think he's focused on the first part at this point, and I'm not saying those aren't the right things to do if we don't succeed in some of them right now.
Everyone talk louder.
Well, I agree. The engineering school has taken the slightly easy way out so far to reach the financial goal. Well, we'll just charge tuition. The other 2 schools, apparently, have gotten more creative and tried to generate some more interesting programs, which is very positive, and maybe they can come up with something that does work. But it's too easy to just say charge tuition and we solve all our problems. That's the part I'm afraid of, and that becomes the easy fallback.
So you think, even if they come up with a solution, you don't think we should necessarily take it, even if tuition is part of it?
Well, unless it's the only thing we can come up with.
I would think, if we were to sell the engineering school to Stanford, I can't imagine that they would keep it free.
Well, that's their issue to resolve, not ours. If we could get anything for it, we could lease the building for 30 years and that would generate some pretty good revenue that would help us reestablish and reinvent themselves.
If the reason not to do it is because tuition is being charged, and yet tuition is being charged through Stanford, I don't see how that,
Well, you'd be keeping faculty and you'd be giving continuity to the student body.
Stanford wouldn't keep the faculty, not this faculty.
Well, no, it wouldn't change overnight, but over time it would change, yeah.
This is not a research faculty.
Right, but I'm saying that conceptually, there might be some sort of scenario that works and is better, and closing down is a pretty dramatic thing to do, and I don't think that would, don't think that wouldn't bring lawsuits and all kinds of grief from all kinds of people. So I think that a genuine solution, if we'll wind up going that way.
So closing it down might mean that we're terminating operations and we're putting the cash into some trust or something. If we're closing it down, we're taking 5 years to come up with a new Cooper Union, one for the 21st century. It would be a very affirmative message, and a message that I think would energize Jomshed. We have no faculty, we have nothing. We don't have to teach art, architecture, engineering, or do we? I must say, I'm not so confident that we could pull off the plan that Jomshed and TC have been working so hard on together. So much stuff has to happen. We have to have a successful capital campaign. We have to just do a bunch of things that have to work out just right. So one of the assumptions goes off when we fall off the cliff. It's a huge amount of work. And I don't know who's going to do the work. To launch new programs, to get the faculty to start the programs, etc., etc. It's a tremendously ambitious plan, and one that I think is simply too hard and too risky. I don't think we shouldn't not do it, but I think we should spend time looking at some of the hard alternatives.
I know this is hard, but Simon Benamy went to Rutgers or something. No, Hofstra, to start a new school. So if Jamshed had the right deans that had the right abilities.
Which scenario are you?
Wait, which scenario are you saying not so hard to you?
To reinvent and start from scratch, you know?
Well, that's fine. That you can do. It's dealing with the existing guys. That's the problem.
Well, I think you have to be careful because I think the current faculty union would have some small claim because it sounds like you're just busting the union by shutting it down and starting over.
You certainly make a lot of people angry.
Well, let's spend some time and talk about the union. We have a non-workable model. It just can't be that we have a permanent obligation to lose money. So these guys have their cushy, jobs that are uneconomic.
I don't think anyone's saying that. I'm just saying that each path has risks, and we try to impose something with the union and the committee meeting on finance. I don't know the name of it.
Finance.
Finance. Jamshed was talking about the risks of involving the Attorney General, that they could basically make our lives hell by going through every dime spent on everything here. There's risks potentially to the tax advantages we have, so there's lots of risks on all of these paths, and the sooner we look at them, the better. The other thing coming at us that came out of that meeting is that the school is in the process of now starting to admit the class of 2013, which in an email from Lawrence, which the board approved last year, that gives the same guarantee of a 4-year tuition scholarship. So we'll need to change that quickly. That's moving forward, and they're doing early admissions as early as, December or something.
Well, the dean of admissions, what's his name?
Linden!
Oh, yeah. He came up to me after the academic affairs committee, and he said, so can somebody tell me what to start telling people now? Because we need to start recruiting and getting applications and need to tell people what they need to know. He was expressing his frustrations, and so it seems to me, and it's obviously monumental, but I'm hearing 3 possible scenarios. One is we find someone to take over all or part of Cooper Union, and then all the part of the Cooper Union, and then all the details associated with wherever they keep the free tuition or not. The second is we try and continue to work hacking away at this, let's call it hybrid plan, and see where it gets us. And then the third is closing down and saving and working to reopen again. I think that one of these issues with it is that it's like the restaurant business closing for renovations to reopen soon. There's obviously a public message for the communications committee to handle about, are they really just saying they're closing down and will we ever be able to reopen? I mean, I really fear, that we will not find a way to open up again.
I think it's fair to ask TC to run the numbers on that scenario.
There are 3 options, and I'm not hearing any others. And each of them comes with so many considerations. How would we get to a point where we would get rid of one because it doesn't have any efficacy, or pursue all 3 and get as much information as we can quickly?
I think you might have seen it, Mark. A few people saw the template I circulated to Jamshed and TC. I mean, just to create a framework where we can look at the pluses and minuses of each scenario. One of my concerns since I've been here is that there are a lot of moving targets. We tend to just dive in and don't sort of methodically go through all the options to get a well-informed decision. We're all thinking of a lot of things in parallel with it, so it's more of just a discussion framework tool that lays out the pluses and minuses. So sometime in the very near future, we will have to pick a path. We're getting very close to that decision point.
I think that's in this package. This doesn't look at a partnership with another college, but it kind of explores the other 2. It explores a hybrid plan in more detail than it explores number 3, but I think we could get some numbers for number 3. But it might be that the cash bill wouldn't be 30 million a year because we're paying 10 million a year interest, and you got somebody trying to rebank it, and then you got some crosscuts, 15 million a year for 5 years, and put 75 million in the bank instead of 150.
I felt that case was light on the costs. The shutdown case would be a lot more costs. When you need to reinvent it, you need to add a lot more costs.
Wasn't a merger explored extensively during George's reign? I remember some discussions with NYU. I remember mentions of it, but I wasn't here, so I don't know if anything ever came of it.
Well, there was the Roosevelt Island Engineering School thing.
Well, it was mentioned. There was a discussion that I was aware of NYU, which I thought was going to be the ultimate solution. You know, where we were just going to work for NYU. But they went ahead and bought Polytechnic, and that ended that conversation. But I don't think there was really, not that I know of, any real discussion with anybody else.
All right, for the sake of time, why don't we just listen to what the plan is for now until November? Let's listen to Jamshed when he comes in, and then we can throw ourselves at the table. Or at least we have a good lag time between now and then.
Well, I think in December, Mark, we really should have, because we're going to be voting in December and we won't want to vote on Hobson's choice. We don't want to just have one choice. That's not a vote. That's really not our job here. We should have at least 2 well-thought alternatives, perhaps 3. Mike's alternative, and gives us a choice to put the school in a strategic direction. Just approving a hybrid plan, you don't really need us for that.
Well, yeah, I agree with that, but I think we should not just sit back and do nothing. What happens in November is going to be crucial. When we hear back from the faculty, and who knows, maybe they come up with something, that'll be wonderful. I'm more convinced about the easy way out that is charging tuition. It is an easy way out. From the art school, I met with Day Gleason the other day, trying to figure out ways to charge for foreign students that come here for a post-bachelor's degree and other programs, and the engineers just might be saying, oh, what the hell, we'll just charge tuition. That's a concern. So, in the interest of time, anything else on this? Any other topics?
Well, the times have changed, and higher education is different. In 2500, there will be no tenured faculty. Anyway.
Times are changing. Higher education is changing. The population demographics are changing. Anyways.
One of the things that's frustrating is that you know there's 10 years in between each raise and rent at the Chrysler Building. It's unfortunate.
We spoke a little bit about the potential of taking them down, but...
Is that a possible negotiation?
I have a meeting with Rob Spire.
The question we don't know is the possibility of that. They've sold out most of their equity to investors, so they have a limited partnership.
Okay. I don't have much to report before we move on, but we changed the terms of the board commitment. The 4-year term that we've kept, but we've limited to 2 terms for that. So 8 years instead of 12 that it was. This comes from the Whaling Group's recommendations. The board will now officially put in place a recommended diving schedule. We've had one that's open, whereas a lot of other institutions have that. I've spoken to most of you about this in private calls. $25,000 a year for the annual fund. There are some new trustees that we nominated today. Everyone is being made aware that we have this minimum, this recommended minimum gift. It's a benchmark for people to anticipate to help build a more effective board and fundraising. I don't really have much else to say. So to save time, Lawrence has an agenda. It's over here if you need it. Now, minutes from the last meeting and committee meetings. Can we have a vote? Are there any corrections?
Well, I would like to request a change to the March 14th, 2012 board minutes to reflect the board's decision to proceed with the current scholarship policy for the entering class of 2013. The minutes reflect that we approved the policy for the class of 2012, but in fact, we also approved it for the class of 2013. So we should make sure that's reflected.
There was a point made during the executive session that in the letter we want to write to the students that we offer the scholarship. We are undertaking to give them a 4-year commitment. There was some discussion about changing the wording in the offer and the letter for admissions.
TSC has looked at that, and doing that now without being able to say what's going on will screw up the entire yield. Because you're basically saying that we might give it up to you for 4 years, but we might not. Obviously.
It's not a contract, Richard, it's an aspiration.
I understand that. But I think we can't make that decision without input from Mitchell. The problem now is not being able to make a decision until December. We've talked about, could you do it for early decision kids or something? It's difficult to switch right now. I agree with you. It's a conundrum that basically puts us on the hook 1 more year, essentially. The problem with doing it now is that you will send out the message, and basically you will have to charge, and it says we're closing in essence.
It's a matter of opinion. I don't think that the incoming freshman will agree, frankly. A lawyer's eye. Your next year's free. You're admitted tuition free. For this year, whatever. I think that you have enough risk going forth that we should at least have a discussion around this point and make the conscious decision to extend it another year or revise the language.
It was already announced in April that there will be full tuition scholarships for the class of 2013.
So maybe we should make this the last time we do that.
We will have to approve next year's class. I think in James's timetable, it calls for that to be done each year in April. So this will not slip by.
So we keep it this way next year until the first opportunity, then we'll bring it up for decision. And with that, a motion to approve this.
Mark, I would like also to get a motion to approve the bylaw, since you brought up the changes suggested by the Wayland Group.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Anything else on that? Okay, great. Let's go to the president's report.
Yes, let me just do some brief things, and then Tom Bristow and I have a new PowerPoint to walk through. First, I want to introduce Sherry Wills, who is with us for a year from the University of Rhode Island, who is here as a visiting professor with the ACE, which is the American Council on Education, selected as a fellow. They have a fellowship program for talented faculty members who are interested in professional development and want to take the next step for leadership opportunities. So we was selected as a fellow, which is quite an honor. So we interviewed her. We're delighted. I think Sherry is not only going to have quite a roller coaster ride and get a tremendous amount of experience and exposure from this experience, but she's also rolling up her sleeves and helping with these projects. So we're delighted to have her. I'm seeking to promote Stephen Baker to Dean of Athletics. He is one of the more extraordinary leaders I have met, of a particular style, which is maybe not everybody's cup of tea, but what I have seen of the mentorship he has provided to so many students, money cannot buy. He is the kind of coach anybody would be fortunate to have. He's not just an athletics coach, but a life coach. I've heard so many stories from students and recent alumni and not so recent alumni about how they wouldn't have gotten through Cooper without him. I'd like to promote him to Dean of Athletics. His role won't change that much. Right now he's Associate Dean of Students and Director of Athletics, and he will remain Associate Dean of Students. But he will become Dean for Athletics. He will be enormously touched, and I know all of the students and alumni who love him will also be greatly appreciative. I'd also like to bring in more of a role in our student morale, connecting with students. He has really teamed the students up for some of the most productive, positive, and civil conversations that we've had. I don't think I need board approval for this, but I want a sense.
Can I just say one thing? You know, remarkable guy. You can't promote him, he's already a god. I just think he's a phenomenal guy. I don't know if you had him, Ray. Ray, I bet you did.
No, very active. In fact, I'm going to his event this Saturday night, his second annual event.
We'll try to get the word out before that, so that .lt is a fundraiser, by the way, and he's really stepped up in terms of fundraising.
wonderful guy. His first day was my first day.
When he get us there for orientation, he closed down the street and set up basketball nets and volleyball nets. And he had all the incoming freshmen playing ball. I happened to drive by, and I saw this, and I stopped for a bit. It was amazing, and everyone had a great time.
Just the fact that a school this small with no gym facilities is a leader in the Hudson Valley in terms of tennis, is amazing.
We had about 6 successive championships, and granted they're not on a Wimbledon level, but we had strong players, and Jesse in that row up at the Cape, he has this 5-day orientation for student athletes. It was our first interaction with the students a year ago. It's golden. The kids who are really competitive athletes get to develop that side, but at the same time, he has them teaching unintelligible, and you never see that at any other institution, and because every student at Cooper is really strong academically. When they're chatting and having pizza and so on, they're talking about engineering and ideas and so on. It's the ultimate scholar-athlete, and he's so entrepreneurial. He finds a tennis court somewhere, he makes a little deal with some bum.
It's incredible how he reaches out to all levels. Yesterday on Tuesday morning, I was playing tennis and I was wearing my Cooper Union coaching staff shirt, and somebody said, "What did you do to earn that?" I said, "Well, aside from wanting to intimidate you, this was a gift, and I do explore who Team Baker is. It was a gift."
Tuition, sustainability.
Hybrid. You should know.
Donut plan.
A heads up, if you will. We did have an employee diagnosed with Legionella. I've had an epidemiologist on campus to talk to people. There's a great deal of consternation. There's nothing here that indicates the employee contracted it here. We are taking measures and staying in touch with the Bureau of Communicable Diseases, just in case you hear this. I'm tracking this very closely.
TC's title is Vice President of Finance and Administration, but DC does everything. She is our Chief Medical Officer as well. She is a trained nurse as well, so that helps. She responded to this Legionnaire's disease outbreak marvelously. There have been a lot of anxieties, as you can imagine. It spreads very quickly. People remember the original Legionnaire's disease. People died from it. She quickly brought together faculty and brought a health official in twice to meet with your constituencies. Thank you, TC.
Just be aware. Thank you.
Okay, I'll lean off and then Tom's going to jump in. We are really banking on 3 fronts simultaneously. Financial, academic, and overall the board has been involved in the discussion with all of those things. The financial side you'll see more of in a minute, as well as on the academic side. Never waste a crisis. Turning adversity into opportunity is really an opportunity that very few institutions have. It will be rough going for some years, but as we come out the other end, I assure you LLTCLL, we will have some outstanding academic programs that are also very exciting and unique. In terms of overall vision, Lee and others have been involved in a vision process that I think progresses simultaneously. Some might say under normal circumstances, you do these things in sequence. You do an overall vision, then a natural plan, then an academic plan, then the finances necessary to support them. We don't have that luxury. I think they all have to be done in parallel, each influencing the other as you go along, because each has the potential to create a public explosion. Certainly the Vision 1 does. So let's move to the next slide. Financial plan.
I'm ready to do the easy part here. As we walked through the plan, we talked a little bit while you were out of the room about the hybrid plan and what kind of touch on the close and reinvest portion. We also talked about other alternatives, partnering, closing departments or schools, which I don't think we're going to discuss here, but bear with me for a couple minutes. What Jamshed has done here is these allocated revenue targets for each of the schools for $12 million total, half in 5 years and the remaining half in 3 to 5 years. That's what TC ran the numbers on. If you can flip to the next slide, it's an annual target. If we meet those, what does it look like? In the best case, we've got $4 million crosscuts. That's in the plan today. Those are getting recommended. The plan also assumes endowment giving of 7.5 to 10 million annually for 2013 to 2020. The capital campaign, there are certain risks associated with that, so we just showed a $12 million model. What we've done here is $10 and $15 models, just proportionally decrease the numbers for each of the years, and just to summarize, for 10 million, we start with 1.5 million in fiscal 15, and it makes up overhead time period the full 10 million in 2020. We turn cash flow positive in 2019 and 2023 to 2031 we're cash flow positive. Unrestricted funds do go negative, and they stay negative for 6 to 7 years. And there's some issues there, and they don't go cash positive until 2034. And then it turns negative again. So stay with me here, but there's another financial fix down the road. The one issue we need to deal with is the cumulative unrestricted cash that peaks at 30 million. We also ran a $15 million model where we're cash flow positive for many, many years. Unrestricted cash still goes negative, so there's 22 million of cumulative unrestricted cash in the hole. If this were our plan, we would need to dip into that permanent endowment. We need some kind of bridge financing. We've talked a little bit about where we could go for the money. Can I go forward a couple pages? Yeah. Do we have this in? Do we have this in there? Yeah. I guess we should attempt to do these things. Let me talk through the first part of it. While TC is making those copies, JobShed is working hard with the faculty to get those funds. There's a November 15th deadline for JobShed to sit down with the faculty, and the faculty essentially either buy in or do not. And to buy in, you need to have a solution, and a solution could be new revenue or cross-cutting. If we had to buy in, I guess we have the risk of how much flesh is going to be in the bones in that November 15th plan, or are we just going to somehow come here and say, well, we hit 3 million, and we go ahead and we figure out later exactly how we hit it. I think we talked Monday on the financial committee that particularly in engineering, the tuition is on the table, and there is a revenue target that they don't, we would have the option to make the full revenue target with a tuition figure.
I think the number we have as a back rule is a 75% scholarship.
So 75% scholarship is you charge, say, 10,000 per student or something.
Well, on average, but not necessarily for every school. But the backup plan, so the 1932 JV board can have confidence, is for the board to have confidence from a fiduciary standpoint to underpin the risks associated with these new revenue-seeking programs is a full allocation of 75% tuition scholarships.
Sorry. 6 million a year is estimated to do so once you face it in over 4 years.
That sounds like too big of a scholarship to me. But you know, we can do this down the road.
Well, if it has to be lower, then it has to be lower.
Well, I think the report indicated that in terms of your deal, that if you go immediately to 50%, then you do lose an enormous amount of selectivity.
Well, the price sensitivity trade-offs you all have in the McGuire Associates report from the earlier meeting, and they're sobering. The price sensitivity is greatest at the highest scholarship end of the curve. So a drop from 100% to 75% scholarship impacts yields more than the equivalent range from 75 to so. On the other hand, that is the only end of the curve we can work on. McGuire is confident that with the 2016 JB 75% scholarship we can withstand the risk to our yield by taking other measures in terms of communications, more investment and outreach with the high schools and so on. But if the board decides it has to be 60% or 70%, so be it. We're hopeful that the Revenue Task Force will provide emerging support for that. Phil Weisbud is the chair of the task force, who is also interested in joining the board, has proposed that each year the board looks to see what the shortfall is going to be and adjust the scholarship year percentage-wise accordingly.
Can I just clarify the numbers? If we go for a 75% scholarship, the equivalent of 10,000 a year, that could give us 6 million a year. So in fact, that says 2/3 of our students would pay, on average, $10,000 a year to receive $6 million?
The $6 million is only the engineering school.
Yeah, because that's 600 people.
Oh, smart.
Only the engineering school?
Yeah.
Our problem is that there's 2 6s here. 6 for the engineering school for 2 periods and 6 for the other schools for the first 5 years.
I think, Mike, an average of 75% tuition scholarships is times 1,000 students. But the reason we say $6 million is because there are investments that are going to 12332 JV be needed to make because we are going to have to give out some scholarships. We're going to have to give out financial aid because there are some highly meritorious students who aren't going to be able to pay $10,000.
So 60% pay $10K and 40% are full scholarships.
We're not going to head out with a particular function. It could be different. It could be a step function, as you suggested, or a more gradual function, but the average 12413 JV discount rate would be 75%. But Tom is asking, is that going to be enough? In December, the board is going to want to have reassurance that at any given year, we can adjust this if we need to charge more.
I think by the end of the year, in year 10, we're talking $12 million, which means $12,000 a kid.
So the tuition is gonna be 10, or we'll average out to 10. What would be our philosophy? Do we charge everyone the same amount who can pay? Or a sliding scale based on financial capability? We haven't figured that out yet.
We looked at a number of different functions, but we are ready to make a 12525 JV recommendation. We will come with a recommendation, and we will give the board some time to discuss those options.
We have to see if they come up with other sources of revenue. If we want to create $6 million, we have to figure out a way to raise $2 million with other programs. Then we have a shortfall of $4 million and we plug it in and see what the tuition rate has to be charged.
Well, it's not that simple. You don't know how many students at the colleges can afford tuition. How many have to be given scholarships still? If 90% of students still have financial need, you're going to be hard pressed to raise that kind of money. If 10% have financial need, then it's easy. It's fairly complex to figure out. How we do it is very important. The mechanics of it, not just, well, we have the target number and that's the number we have to achieve. There are a lot of ways to achieve that number.
And the other factor is competing schools. The schools we'd be competing against for applicants. We'd have to see how we would compare with the tuition we would be charging. Would it continue to be lower than the other selective schools?
Let me just backtrack here a little bit, because, if I can, because while that's all true, but we're going to come back and approve it at the November 15th and December board meeting, and approve is that we're going to provide a strategy to raise a certain amount of money, and that faculty is going to buy into that. We need faculty to buy into our ability to make up the shortfall. Exactly how do we make up the revenue shortfall? I think it's premature to come up with a formulaic approach to that. We need to know what the shortfall is, and we need to provide enough flexibility for us to raise money in a tuition-raising way.
I thought when we looked at the numbers at the resort in Terrytown, that 75% model still left us with unresolved options. We were digging deeply into the corpus, and then we have the other perspective, Jamshed, which you had voiced, that going much up above the 75% in terms of dollars won't have a great impact. I think you wrote that in your letter. I don't see where you were coming from to something that we can do something that's good for students and the school. There's a disconnect.
All right, let me try addressing that in the way I spoke to the Finance Committee a few days ago. My sense now, in here a little over a year, is that both the short-term problem and the long-term problem are so large, so overwhelming, and we've allotted limited time, that any attempt to solve the long-term problem in one fell swoop, so-called ripping the Band-Aid off, has enormous reputational risks in terms of students heading for the door, difficulty recruiting new students. The only way I can see through this is to break up the problem spatially and temporally. So the spatial parsing of the problem is school by school, architecture, and engineering. They're very different cultures, and if you try to have one-size-fits-all solution, you'll get a mess. That's part of the spatial compartmentalization. Another dimension of the spatial parsing is the undergraduate tuition versus new programs or graduate tuition. 12808 JB, trying to get a little bit from each. That places bite-sized lumps that the faculty and community are able to chew on. And in the temporal parsing of the problem is the phase 1 and phase 2, the first 5 years and then the next 5 years. It's impossible to envision by solving this right away. The good news is that we do have this bump in the rent for 2018-19, so I would like to email spreadsheets that show segregation between the short-term problem and the long-term problem. That's the only way I can think about it. All this planning about new programs and undergraduate tuition is to address the long-term problem, which is, how do we, we achieve a balance with the uptick of the rent 2018-19, how do we sustain it going forward because of inflation? That's the problem we're solving right now. The short-term problem is how do we get to 2018 without going bankrupt? I'd like to separate those discussions, because there is no way it's too late for us to solve that problem without undergraduate tuition. It's too late. Let's look to the long haul with the sustainability problem in 10 years and then a whole different set of solutions for the short term, which we've spoken to already and TC can elaborate on. I think we're going to have a resolution on that coming up in a bit.
Can I just add one more summary shot at what you're talking about? At 75% discount rate, we raise, if everybody pays, about $10 million. If we need 6, kind of worst case on the revenue stream, around 60% will pay that rate. I'm kind of thinking we go to McGuire and work through that, and I bet if you charge 10, face value, you probably don't collect 6. So I don't think that's too big a number or too small a number. And then in the second leg, if you assume 8 years from now, 10 years from now, there's no other revenue sources. 75% gives you $10 million, and that's not enough. So we may need more flexibility than the 75%.
Absolutely, and I think any communications that come out of the December board meeting, the board has a responsibility to make sure that there's no sugarcoating on 132.28 JB this. I couldn't agree more. On the other hand, the reputational risk side has to be managed properly. So let's move on. I want to thank Ray Fauci for the template for this. So let's move on.
I think step 1 is going to be stuff on the table today. The hybrid strategy, pursuing and seeing what comes back, do the 3 faculties, come back with something that looks workable, and if it does, we need to solve the short-term problem. If it's a workable response with faculty, we need to solve the long-term problem. And then, the short-term problem is we go into the corpus. And at what point do we approach MetLife? At what point do we approach the Attorney General? At what point do we think about selling the dorm? I guess there are pluses and minuses to all of these. I'm not here to talk about preferred solution, but these are things I think TC and Jamshed have had discussions with various parties on each of these, and some of the pluses and minuses are laid out, on that. If you can flip forward just one. Number 5 here is a contingency plan for closing 1 or more of the schools. If we think that the viable solutions or the solution that looks too high risk, what do? I guess that's kind of something in my heart that I'd like to avoid, but we may be there, and I think it needs to be a credible discussion and a credible plan. TC, are there financials we can see in detail? TC?
Oh yes, of the closures. They're very detailed. In the packet that I've handed out, there are the details associated with each scenario. And I actually have much more detail in person by person, which I haven't given you, but we're very carefully went through it and what would happen.
I guess we didn't review this in the finance committee, so I'm not as familiar with all the details here, but something we would need to understand and review as a group.
We have a legal memo as well on the closure option. The company boards of that are homologated with our charter, and TC can do more than that.
Can we flip to
the backside, it seems to me that our board decisions here are kind of that November 15th deadline, and something's coming out of that. I don't know what we want to foreshadow.
Let's maybe be clear as to what the alternatives we face are. What can we think of as the two choices, at least on the table, at the December board meeting? Is it the hybrid plan versus closure? What is it, Josh?
I think it's closure of one or more schools, and then what? My guess is that it hasn't been addressed in this timeline. Is it permanent closure, or is it
temporary closure? 5 years.
We've also calculated, depending on whether you close down one, over 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, the growth of the endowment over each of the subsequent years, the savings you derive from closing this, that, or the other thing, you put in the endowment and it appreciates. So we've also calculated that as well, so you can have a sense of that.
Don't be mistaken in thinking that closure is an option for the short-term problem. 13700 JB, it's too late. It's too late. It was too late years ago. I think that because of massive closure costs, we would anticipate the class action lawsuits, etc., 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 and we have to graduate students. Closure part of Iona turn option.
It is. TC took into account $2 million a year in legal costs. Took into account the flushing of the existing students, and I must say it looks like an attractive option. It seems to me, Jamshed, that you've never talked about this. Wouldn't it be the option that truly gives you a clean piece of paper after dealing with all the incoming flack? That says, I, Jamshed, am now ready to reinvent for the 21st century. A technical or arts-oriented college or university, why not?
Well, thank you. I have to agree. And Stan and I had this conversation, and I've learned a lot from his perspective. A year ago, I could not, as an educator, a lifetime teacher, I could not, in my brain, entertain thinking of the notion of closing a school as a plan A. It just seemed kind of violent. But Stan makes the argument, isn't it the fantasy? Sure, it's a fantasy of every college president. Get rid of these characters. It has played in my mind. Believe me, there are many nights when I'm thinking, boy, that would be so much fun. But then I meet with the students, and I think you know what, I don't think it's a good plan for these students or our prospective students. With 13814 JB closure, we are backing away from the responsibility and tremendous trauma for students and families who have invested so much, if not money, in terms of future. I think that a tremendous disruption would be consequential to reputational costs. So when we do open up in 5 years, I don't think we will have gotten rid of the reputational issues and the bitterness of all the people who would have to be transferred out, plus the complication of who you see through. The seniors graduate, but the juniors really can't transfer, so you have to give that a year. What about the sophomores? It's difficult for them to transfer. So what I've come to in the end is I have wrapped my brain around closure, finally, but as a backup option if we can't get a plan to transition the institution. I'm pushing for a transitional plan rather than close, and start all over again, while making it clear that if the transitional plan doesn't work, I'm prepared to close it down. That's why the engineering faculty is now working hard, because they now believe I'm serious that they could be closing down.
Let me share my own experience in this regard, because I've dealt with it most of my career with troubled entities and figuring out solutions for them. One of the things I've learned from all my experiences is there is a fundamental difference between a product-based entity and a service-based entity. In a product-based entity, such as GM, and there are some services that get standardized enough to really look like products, such as airlines. In a product-based business, closure can be predictable in that you know what liabilities to get rid of and what assets to keep, and you come out of the other end and it's a lot cleaner. People are sometimes embarrassed by it, but it's a fairly predictable thing. I don't know how many success stories of service-based entities come out on the other end, coming out healthy on the other end. At the very least, it's a crapshoot. I, for one, have never invested in a business nor advocated to any board with which I've been involved in a service-type environment that they seriously contemplated. It may be the only option for what we're thinking and so on, but I, for one, would not be going into it with the view that we can predict what's coming out at the other end. As an investor in a commercial enterprise, I may well invest once it comes out the other end. But look, my last experience at I-Corps sort of started this way with closure and bankruptcy papers all prepared. It was a melodramatic moment when I said, look, I'm out of this, is the direction we're going. We should just bear in mind that this is a service we provide. It's not a standardized product. There's a lot of touch to it. If we go down the closure path, I don't think we can come out the other end.
So it's difficult to do, it's true, but I have a sense that the education model is broken, and that the reason this is hard for you, Jamshed, is because it's a hard problem, and working harder at it doesn't mean you're gonna fix it. The happiest I've seen you, Jamshed, has been working at the Minerva discussions, interacting with Ben Nilsson. You lit up as you were working with him, thinking about how you could be part of the future of higher education, how we could be part of the story, part of our story. This field is undergoing a cataclysmic change, one that hasn't happened, I guess, ever, in its multi-hundred-year history. It's happening now. I think it's forced upon us because it's going to happen now or it's going to happen later. We're not going to be happy if we don't have a serious closure discussion and what the alternative looks like now when we do have some money in the bank and when we do have some options to reemerge as a different educational model. I think we'll have the discussion 3 to 4 years from now, but with fewer options. I'm not going to argue that this right now is what we should do. I think your approach of a plan A is the right approach. But I think that for our board, we need to understand what plan B looks like, so we're not going to be voting on one plan in December.
The one concrete suggestion that I make is that we think about financial implications of the closure option. We ought to run various scenarios on the speed of recovery. I've seen lots of professional services firms go through this, dozens. And the speed of recovery is almost always longer than people think. It will make a big difference to the financial model whether the students, even if we're charging tuition and doing all that stuff, show up in 1 year at sort of the level we expected, or it takes them 5 years. I think that might present a more sobering picture of the closure model than might seem if it just looks like we've cleaned out a bunch of, that is, the revenue picture is very hard to predict in the closure model.
Stan is correct. I resonate very much to future-oriented thinking about higher education. I assure you that I will be guiding the institution to embrace these technologies, and we're not going to be trapped in the past. I think if we get over this hump, there will be so much opportunity for new programs to configure it differently. I think we can lead. We're not in a position to lead now, even in an online center. We've been rejected by one of the ones we wanted to partner with because we don't want 4629JB have a global brand. We've got to build that global brand in engineering and all of our subjects to be able to be competitive in that sector. Leave it at that for now. Before we drop this, it seems to be a subject of interest. Closure also brings with it risks to tax equivalency. When I first arrived, I was informed by my predecessor that tuition would risk to tax equivalency. We explored that briefly and it turns out there's no basis for that. We have a memo. A legal, not opinion, I'm told it's a memo. Is that the right word? TC?
It's a preliminary analysis. It's not in depth.
Okay, so it's an opinion. That's not an opinion.
At the end of the day, I tell people a legal opinion doesn't make it right, doesn't make it so. The firm we got that last opinion from no longer exists.
That and $4 gets you a cup of coffee. And why do we pay the lawyers?
Some opinions are dangerous. We're known as clearly gutless because we don't render a lot of opinions, and that's why they say it's worth the money you pay us for.
I see. Well, this opinion states that there is risk to the tax equivalency if we close because the charter is not compatible with being the foundation of some other kind of organization. We are an educational institution and the charter mandates a school of art and it calls for a polytechnic the engineering school as resources are sufficient. The reading of the attorney is that we could, if we close the School of Art, we could conceivably argue that architecture is sort of like art. It's a case that would have to be made. If we could close the engineering school, we could conceivably argue that architecture is sort of like engineering. That is also a case that would have to be made. 14855 JB closing all schools. Clearly, there is no question we'd lose tax equivalency, and if we reopen, we would not have that revenue stream. Needless to say, I spoke to Peter Caffiero on the phone a couple of days ago. TC, I haven't had a chance to brief you on this, or Lawrence, but he said the Attorney General is very political and the New York Attorney General has historically been a stepping stone to a governorship or some higher office, and Attorney General looking at the populist angle of giving back taxpayer dollars for the taxpayer could be a populist thing to do, and the Cooper Union is getting the benefit of city taxpayers, but it's not actually providing education because they've shut down the whole school. That could be, I think, a difficult thing to take on if you have a very ambitious AG looking to make the mark, so we have to be very careful about closure from the standpoint of the tax equivalency.
Jamshed, is this a good time to highlight how we discuss closure outside of this room?
Yes, it may be necessary to distribute, Lawrence, a highlighted version of my community memo that highlights the language. So internally, with the engineering faculty, I've had to be blunt because the engineers are very blunt and not very subtle. We say reinvention or closure, and reinvention means these practical things, so many millions and so many years, etc., and they get it. Our external language cannot be that blunt about the closure option because it freaks people out. It scares people. The faculty, even the engineering faculty, who needed to hear it bluntly, don't necessarily want their students to hear it bluntly because they're afraid students will go for the doors. Head for the doors. So we talk about sustainability, and we'll get you that language. We talk about sustainability. If we're not sustainable, then we can't be sustained. Sustainability requires that we have a plan that conforms to the dollar parameters that we believe necessary to be sustainable. It's almost as 15206 JP enigmatic. The second part is that no program can be successful or sustained without faculty support. If the faculty can't support a sustainable plan, then we fail. That's about how close one can come. Now closed doors, you know, blah blah blah. At some point, if people try to play games with this, we may have to be more blunt and say a bit directly, we'll shut you down. It seems to me that the politics of destruction of the Friends of Cooper core group is such that they're actually seeking to raise the risk of reputational damage, in order to make it more difficult for us to institute tuition anytime, undergraduate or graduate. It has already been effective. It's frightened many of our constituencies. They would love to see a closure discussion because that enables them to raise the stakes even higher. Drogen has been trying to get official confirmation of that. These people are even talking about shutting the place down, even before they've taken other steps, which they believe would be sufficient to solve the problem. We have to be careful as well.
I wanted to raise it because I know that there are members of Friends of Cooper Union that are reaching out to trustees rather candidly on this. I just wanted to make sure that we're using the same language. Francois and Tom will be meeting with a small group of reps from that constituency, and I expect that it will come up. So it's just good from a communication standpoint that we're all on the same page. I'll get you names, brief bios.
2 points to that. One, as Jamshed says, and particularly coming from this law firm that's rather bullish, and I think in terms of closure, we shouldn't put it down on their writing because it's probably discoverable. The risk to tax exemption if we close the schools is very significant. The commentary was very heated on this, and if you go that route, you have everybody and their brother going to the Attorney General. And then anybody could intervene. The Attorney General would intervene. Then your $2 million estimate, TC, would be well out the window for legal aid if that happened. That's a risk, in addition to the one Vicus points, about ever cutting out the back end. The other thing, for closure, TC, and I raised this in the executive discussion in terms of costs of closure to the extent we have the students transferring with full scholarships. That would be an issue of whether or not we're on the hook.
Well, we did a little bit of math on that. I mean, depending on how you unwind, you could end up with one class that would have to transfer out, who would end up with potentially having 2 years to complete.
So these are the factors. Some of this stuff looks very good, but in terms of the comps and jumping the closure and looking at similar service firms, and as Vicus points out, it's not obvious that you come out the other end.
Well, we did not compute into the analysis if we had to pay tuition for the students that went somewhere else.
Because again, one of your models was flushing all the students out that we have.
Exactly.
If we talk about orderly closure, that would be the base case because it addresses the concerns that Richard raised as a kind of right thing to do.
One question I have, to go back a little bit, at the off-site meeting, we spoke about getting information from the students about the family's financial info, and we held off on that. Now, it's pretty apparent, at least in the engineering school, that tuition is going to be part of the picture, the mix. Shouldn't we start asking about the financial status so we can take a little guesswork out of what could potentially be the yield?
Well, I think once the engineering faculty decides that that's one of the routes they're going to take, then we'll have to implement FAFSA for them.
They can't ask for that anyway with the next incoming class?
Mitchell Lipton was a bit dismayed about that. I have one request. It's taken all summer to get faculty to calm down and roll up their sleeves and start working cooperatively. In spite of all of the incoming malarkey and bombardment that between now and November 15th or the board meeting on December 5th, I really don't think it's appropriate to have other little explosions. The closure public explosion 15907 JP could happen. It could be a story that then we have to scramble to deal with all the planning and strategy, but they'll make noise out of this fast, I think. You bet they'll make a lot of noise about it. They'll characterize it as predatory and they'll get the students all worked out about the 1% and the 99%. Let's focus on the hard work that's now going on. That's hard enough to manage day by day before we create another explosion. I say let's talk about that in December. Obviously we need that data and we will get the data.
But what if we could do it when we accept the kids? Say, here's your full tuition scholarship, now fill out a form.
As soon as you ask for that, we're charging tuition. You know, Mitchell spent a lot of time on this, and we consulted with McGuire to see if there's any way to position this that would be positive, that would allow us to get this information and, you know...
Even Mitchell telling the School of Art that we may be thinking about not doing early admission caused this very constructive problem solving to come to a halt. It was Daddy who torpedoed that. She used that info to get the art faculty all riled up. Saskaya's view was that complicates the work they're doing designing MFA programs, and so 20101 JP on, let's just, my view is that we stay on the record with the incoming class of 2013. We stated that in April, it was grandfathered. We grandfathered them. You gotta understand, managing these things on the ground, it's one thing to make a decision and say we should do this and we should do that. But managing it on the ground in a complex organization like a university is a very, very different matter.
Given the delicacy of these communications, what, if any, communications are occurring with any of the constituencies involved here? Any board communications that are not going through you? The question is, basically, these communications at this stage are very delicate communications. I, for one, would be reluctant to engage with any of them without prior preparation, scripting, and so on. Even then, I don't know if it would be wise for me to do it. What board communications are occurring with these constituencies without Jamshed or TC or executives in the room?
Well, I think it's a great question. And in fact, it was one of the reasons why at the outset of the request of the Friends of Cooper Union to have a meeting with the board that we initially suggested a meeting with representatives of the board and Friends of Cooper, Jamshed and TC, so that we don't have a massive meeting, so that all the information is consistent and sort of spot on and there's no second guessing.
So there are some members of the board meeting with the Friends of Cooper.
There is, except the only difference is that they're meeting now without the president and without TC. And this was at the request of board leadership, which we have no problem with. So I think the point you raise is a good one. Let's be clear about what we're communicating from the board to other constituents without having the administration present.
The real answer to this is that there should be no communications between board members and anybody else. When I met with Dave Gleason the other day, I've known Dave for 30 some odd years, and we didn't discuss anything that Jamshed hadn't already discussed. The meeting that they were requesting originally with Jamshed and TC, I didn't think it was a good idea to give them another avenue to get Jamshed at a meeting like this. My intention with the meeting with representatives from the board is to hear them out. They wanted to meet with representatives from the board, so you listen to what they say. Say they came in and they have really legitimate claims against it. They have a right to be heard. I don't think that's what they're trying to do, but I have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they wanted the board's attention for some reason. My intention is to listen to them, not to get involved with having debates about what's going on, because they have to deal with Jamshed and the administration for that. To satisfy their claim and dissuade them from causing more damage to the school.
Mark, is that wise? I appreciate your intention, but having been in many of these communications, as I'm sure you have, you know, the one word misplaced in syntax is syntax, and suddenly you know, would it not be better for us to, as a board, say it looks like we have appointed executives that are leading us through a complex change and decision-making process? Please meet with them, and we'd be happy to entertain any communications you want to send us through them.
They're asking for the meeting so they don't have to filter what they hear through the administration.
I can't imagine that they're not going to ask us pointed questions, and I think you should talk about the risk on preventing... We need to be really well prepared and on point.
Well, no! The thing is not to answer the important questions, because that's not the avenue for that.
We'll have to figure out how to deflect questions.
I don't see that as a problem, because they have to deal with the administration. It's not the trustees' position to discuss this with outside groups. They go through the administration.
My view, for what it's worth, I don't know what the board's upside could possibly be from taking that meeting. I don't know what good could come of it. We're not going to say a lot, so I can't imagine we can persuade them of anything. The only thing that if we don't meet with them, they'll claim is that we're hiding something, etc., etc. That's a standard communication problem, and I don't think we're the best people to deal with it. And I think Jamshed could, or any executives could, professionally say to them, look, we appreciate your concern, and the board is being approached by a lot of groups, and so we simply want to channel your communication so we can manage it well.
Have they enunciated their goals in having this meeting, or is it just they want to be heard to tell us things directly?
They wanted to come to this meeting with the entire board.
Preposterous. Possibility of implication in their messages that a group of them wanted to help, whatever that means, and they wanted to address this group. I tend to think like Vegas Vice, to potentially undermine the president for not having him at the meeting, and I don't know what the game is other than to hear. If they do have some plans they want to bring forward about how to turn the negativity of Friends of Cooper into positive collaborative effort, then perhaps it's worth listening. But my concern is that they will have pointed questions, and I wish now to be the people responding.
Is Jay coming? Is Jay going to be one of them? One of the things I spoke to Jay about is stressing that it has to be communication, not confrontation. Is John Leeper coming?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. As of yesterday morning, he wasn't. But then as of yesterday evening, I got an email saying there's a chance he may come, so they want to have, rather than 3, 4.
Right. Well, that's fine. John Leeper's a relatively rational guy. He's not going to do any Barry Drogan antics.
I would agree.
What an idiot.
I would agree. I would just say one thing relative to this, pardon me, sorry. You know, Jamshed and I met with those very people, and I walked them through the financial model. It's not our plan, certainly. It ran out of money. It's not our plan. But you know what? Walk them through. Look, this is what the future looks like. John Leeper said this is very sobering. Rocco and Carrie Carnahan said, let's put together a 2-page sheet that talks about the history of Cooper Union and the finances. Let's put together a frequently asked questions. We did that, and I sent it to them, asking for their comments, their feedback, for any input, and heard nothing from them. They say they want to communicate effectively, but the truth of the matter is, they have not shown that to be the case.
I mean, when we did post the FAQ 3 months after giving it to them, and they trashed it online immediately, they've now loosened their FU0 arm.
Sorry to interrupt you, but my comment was not specific to this group. I mean, I wasn't really aware of this before this conversation. We're in a stage now where every word is subject to manipulation. As I was told before my very first TV appearance. Please remember that more artists have been brought down by the media than made by it. So, the downside from saying anything is vastly greater than any upside. I would advocate a simple board policy that during this time, all communications must be channeled through our president and his representatives. One of the things you could do, Jamshed, is tell the board where you think it's appropriate for a subcommittee of the board, or that would be my vote, and without even knowing the specifics of the situation, you could tell me that this is Mother Teresa's own educational charity, and I'd still say the same thing. One word out of context is trouble. That would be my view. It's a very safe thing, and I don't think there's any downside to it, and I don't think there's any upside to being open.
I see a downside just in the bashing. The making claims that we're hiding something, that we're afraid to meet with them. I see that as being more than bolstering their chorus. They want to meet? Okay, let's have a meeting. Let's see what they have to say and take it back.
Mark, people will make that claim regardless. It's a standard 101 practices. I want to have a meeting with you, and if you don't take it, you're hiding something. Look at what's going on in the presidential race. Whatever your specific affiliation might be, if Romney doesn't release his returns, the assumption is that he's hiding something. And whether you're a Romney supporter or not, it will give you pause. People will say that no matter what we do, and they will say not only are we hiding something now, we've been hiding something all along. We need to, as a board, be prepared for that, and I think we ought to ultimately get our PR professionals and legal folks to help us out with that. In the meantime, we ought to let the people that are in the flow handle it.
Mark, if you will, just to be clear for all the members, the current status is the Friends of Cooper Union asked for a meeting with the board. Lawrence consulted with Mark. Lawrence told Friends of Cooper Union that the full board would not be available, but 3 to 4 reps would be available. Do you have 3 or 4 representatives that you would like to send? So at this point, this is the status of their request. At this point, they believe that they are getting a meeting with the president and the 3 members of the board, and that expectation hasn't been officially changed in the emails between Lawrence and Carrie Carnahan. So they now think they're getting a meeting. Mark has been thinking the last 48 hours that perhaps the president and TC shouldn't be there, but at this point, Friends of Cooper Union has been told that they're getting a meeting, that they're meeting the president, TC, and the representatives of the board.
My point is not about this specific meeting. Look, perhaps this is water under the bridge and it needs to go ahead because it's too late to change it. My point is a broader point about communication, and as well I would say that the board, with respect to this specific meeting, I would say the board meeting with any group without the president, I think sends the wrong signal. I, for one, would not be an advocate of doing that.
I see it differently. I see not having the president there and the other board members who are there expressing their 100% support for the president without him being there shows them we're behind the president. I think if the president's there, they're going to take it to mean that we're the president's toadies. And we're going to say something only because the president's there. So I see it differently.
If I was that group, here's what I would put on my website after that meeting. Look, there's obviously division on the board because they are willing to take a meeting without the president. And by the way, as I was looking at the meeting, this is the kind of thing I would post on my blog. I noticed that member X was smiling and taking furious notes when I said that. Don't you think that so-and-so is not handling this well? This is what I'd do if I wanted to make trouble, and I think we need to be very cognizant of that downside.
Stan, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, sorry Stan, looks like I interrupted you. Sorry.
Well, at this point, withdrawing from the meeting will certainly be viewed as...
Yeah, and I'm okay with that, and that's water under the bridge. Our choice is whether we ask Jamshed to join it or not. They still expect Jamshed to be there.
I think, if that is the expectation, that we should follow through with it. My view, Vicus, is I don't want to make it look like Jamshed is hiding. We should be more in a listen mode and clarification mode, but not sort of sharing anything beyond that. My discussion with Barry Drogan last week, he just had some completely misguided understanding for a financial situation.
Barry?
He didn't understand how depreciation is a non-cash item. And you can get it back through a cash flow statement. Something as mundane as that. Amateur. I don't know what their agenda is for this meeting, but if we can just listen to what they're saying and clear up any misunderstandings. I know we've tried already several times. I think we should do that, and I don't think we should look like we're hiding, because that gives them ammunition to say we're hiding.
I mentioned this to Jamshed. When I was a student here, they were going through the Green Camp issue. Jack White was the president and came to a bunch of students and spoke to them and was asked why he wasn't in the room negotiating. And the union was going on at that point. He said if he was in the room, he'd have to answer the question right then and there. When he's not in the room, the negotiators for the school can always say, we have to get back to you on that. So, it gives them that cushion. So, if they're gonna ask pointed questions when Jamshed's there, how does he not answer it?
I think it's important for John to be there. The opportunity for us to get out of sync on message is great, and there needs to be no question of who's driving the bus. There's no such thing as a meeting board members when the chief executive is not there. That's what you do when you fire a chief executive. I think it's very important that the three of you represent the board's perspective and the administration's perspective. I can't really recommend against having the board's perspective without the administration present.
Lawrence, what was the original response when they requested a meeting with the board and the president?
The original request was to show up to this meeting.
Right, well obviously you rejected that. But in terms of the delegation.
Right, so I responded to that request by recommending that we have a conversation, that we have representatives of the board meet with the representatives of their group, and we would schedule it at the earliest possible date, and that the president would host the meeting.
Right. Having said that, I think it would send a very bad message if Jamshed wasn't there.
I mean, I don't know if I agree with that, but if that's consensus, I'll go with that.
So you're talking about Leaper or Katura?
Leaper, Satara, Carrie Carnahan, and Sangu. I don't remember her last name.
You expect it to be a civil meeting?
Do you see someone taking pictures at the door?
Oh, guys.
My feelings with Leaper, he's always been civil. Rocco is, I think, more off the reservation at times. But he's not uncivil, I don't think.
Just the paparazzi.
I haven't been chased by paparazzi since Lehman Brothers went bad.
That's not true. I saw pictures of you online in your bathing suit.
It's just some students. I told them not to take pictures, but it doesn't mean they're not going to look.
I would advocate a standard board posture going forward. With any such requests of any kind, we simply say that the board would like for you to direct all communications to the president's office and we meet with them frequently. And whatever, you fill in the blanks, that's it. If anyone does call me up or email me, I'll say, listen, please talk to President Barucha. End of story. That's that I'd recommend as standard posture. If at some point you think it's appropriate for a subset of the board or the whole board to meet, then that's something we should discuss. I suggest we get a council.
Well, not this particular case, but generally. If there's a particular group that has some sort of legitimate complaint against the administration, they should have some sort of way to bring that to the board's attention. To just blanket say that we don't want anybody, you have to go through the administration, limits that possibility.
Can I ask Lawrence to turn that off just in case? I see people lurking.
Yes and no, Mark. As the CEO of any company, I would be quite troubled if any subset of my board was meeting with an investor group without my concurrence. And as general manager, I would be reluctant to be concurrent unless I saw a very specific reason to do so. That would be normal protocol for most boards. I mean, anyone on any public board I know of, no board member would think of meeting with a faculty member or an outsider without being arranged, without that meeting be arranged by a CEO.
Unless there was malfeasance, criminal, or, a violation of the company policy. And we actually have a policy for that, the whistleblower stuff.
Exactly. If there's a harassment claim or anything like that, there should be a channel for that, and that should be a truly private channel. That should not be coming to any of us directly.
Yes, I actually agree with you on that because my buddy Peter here is in a credible position as president of the Alumni Council, so he's going to be meeting with these people at those meetings, and he may be.
Yes, and alumni trustees are also a part of the Alumni Council. They are expected to engage.
Well, yes, I think it shouldn't be black and white, but I think in general,
Okay. You should come. I mean, I was trying to save you. But, are we done with the financial planning? Thoughts?
Mark, you had asked for more texture on the academic plans, but I think given the time constraints, I'd be happy to expand on that very quickly. I think Mark is 22435 JB interested in being briefed on what the exciting academic ambitions are going to be. The bullet points are in my slides and the PowerPoint is in your packets, and I can tell you more about that anytime you want. There are lots of exciting things that are going to come out of this.
Could you please, the decision point document that I handed out before was kind of an interim. That was a very early version, so you're gonna have to look at the document. It's the one that Lawrence was here for. So use that one. It's the final version, and it incorporates all the final recommendations from the Ray Fauci and Tom Driscoll. Yeah, I'd be happy to take the old one back. That's what I do, take things back. Most of you guys don't like carrying around those papers I give you anyway.
Do we have a shredder in the room?
No. Yeah, thank you.
Can we have a quick resolution here, please? Resolution authorizing the administration to explore bridge financing options. TC, you want to talk about this for a minute?
Sure. Just a minute. So as Jomshed pointed out, we have two things to deal with. We have the short-term issues and the long-term issues. Two things. Faculty are hard at work, working with Jomshed on how to generate revenue in the long haul. We do have that period of time when we run out of restricted funds, and in consultation with many of you and many experts, we've identified 3 potential alternatives that we can pursue for bridge financing for when we run out of unrestricted funds. There are 3 stated here. One is to approach the Attorney General and get permission to invade the permanent restricted corpus to a certain amount based on our projected needs. So basically we'd be going for a side press, asking them to allow us to invade the corpus. My expectation is that we would then pay that back because we would have all these new programs online that would generate the revenue, and we would. So that's number 1. Number 2, While an academic institution like the Cooper Union does benefit from having a dorm, it is possible that we will still need to sell the dorm in order to generate some additional funds. The broker that I've been working with, they recommended by Bill Santo, anyone ring a bell? Believes that the tower plus the retail has the potential to generate $20 to $30 million. Now, it's not just the tower or the dorm part. That doesn't really generate all that much money. You get the real kick out of the retail on the 2 lower floors. We don't own that, but we can actually sell the lease over to them. There's a way to do that. It's actually much more valuable. What makes it even more valuable is that the current tenants' leases will be up in 2018. In 2023 and 2024, so a purchaser of that leasehold would then be in a position to have new tenants, and they could charge us a much higher price. The third item is to seek to borrow more money, which I think is the last resort of all, because another is to talk to MetLife about rescheduling the current payments that we still have. I've done the work on all 3 of these. MetLife does not appear to be too inclined to do anything more with us, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't go back to them. Actually, Jamshed and I have met with the Attorney General, talking about potentially, tuition.
No.
I do have an attorney, and I've already done 2 Cypress proceedings with them, 2 successful proceedings, so we've started down that path. And now we're finally starting down the dorm path. I mean, I think the thing about the dorm is that there's an alternative that is available for us, which allows the benefit of getting income off of that building. There's a developer who's developing a rather large dormitory, 500 beds, right near Tompkins Square Park. I mean, it's prime space. Maybe, but that's minor. That's minor. They would make 100 beds available to us on a long-term lease. There's little downside to us, really, truly. We lease them for $1 a bed, and the students pay the residence fee. We're trying to balance getting money off the dorm by selling it, but still having a reasonable alternative that would allow us to continue to recruit students from outside the area, which is important to our diversity, our crazy diversity.
TC, you didn't include anything with the Tishman Spire on Chrysler here.
Well, that's an interesting question. I've had, discussions with Studley Inc. about the willingness to do that, and I shared information with Mark that I had gotten from Studley about approaching Tishman Spire about smoothing out those payments. Mark, did you talk to Rob?
I have a meeting with him set up. We want to talk about other things anyhow. I'm going to mention it to him.
I'm just wondering why it isn't listed as one of the options.
I think that's probably one of them, although the Attorney General is a little bit dicey, and I think that Tishman Spire is even more dicey. We don't like dicey here at the Cooper Union. I think we should pursue all of these alternatives, truly. We may get some from column A, some from column B, and some from column C, and we should be prepared to do that. But, we just want to be sure that you're all aware that these are the options that are available, that, we will pursue.
Now, is it fair to say that selling the dorms is low execution risk, but perhaps distasteful? The others are a high execution risk?
Actually, I think this is probably correct. Lower execution risk and higher distastefulness.
With the dorm, too, there's no debt on it because we paid it off with the MetLife loan. So we'd be selling the dorm, taking the money from that for our expenses, but still paying for it as part of the MetLife loan.
Sure, but we need the liquidity.
Have we looked into trading off 30 Cooper Square? And if we have these beds elsewhere at a very reasonable price and using the dorm building for our administrative?
I've thought about that, Don, but 30 Cooper is the cost is $700, maybe $1 million. So if we move out of there and we move into the dorm, we're not generating a large pot of liquid cash. On the face of it, it reduces expenses, but it doesn't really give you...
And we lose another asset.
We can stop this asset sale thing, but we might have to lose another one before we become...
I'm looking at every place I can go to get about $30 million, and I think borrowing it should be our last resort, really, because no one's gonna like what we're going to get charged for it, but just dig the hole a little deeper.
And we're digging a deeper and deeper hole.
to that point, I just wanted to ask if we should get direction on the MetLife renegotiation and the Tishman discussion. Is our goal to fill this $20 to $30 million gap that we need to bridge, and are we going into it with the preparedness to give some 30 or 40 years out? I'm thinking either one of these other parties, MetLife or Tishman, are economic people. If we ask for help over the next 5 years, they're going to say, what's in it for me? If we go into this philosophically, saying we're willing to give on economics some distant period down the road, is that the thought process?
I think it's going to be a negative trade for us no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no other way.
Let's take a vote on that. Motion to explore bridge financing options. No opposed? Okay, good.
That was easy. Would you care to comment on the vision and such?
Sure. I didn't prepare anything. At the offsite, we brought the idea, as Jamshed mentioned earlier, the difficulty of making financial decisions and bringing options on the table without a broader concept of where the school might be going. In other words, what is the vision component of sustainability? So that we base our decision making on some concept. A few people volunteered to engage in that discussion. Stan and Richard, and of course Jamshed, also Audrey, Flack, and Lawrence has been helping facilitate that discussion. We have a phone conference, and if you recall at the offsite, we threw a couple questions up on the projector after one of our recesses. A couple of them were, what is truly unique about Cooper Union, and what would we never want to lose about it? So really our phone conference was revisiting those two questions as the beginning step to moving progressively. What happened in the ensuing time? And I have some discussion with Jamshed about this and that. We all agreed that this couldn't be a top-down decision. There is a Cooper community, and there will be no possibility of a buy-in to vision that doesn't include faculty, the deans, certainly, and even going further perhaps, students and the alumni. And so I think it's accurate to say that we've agreed that this is a long-term process, and hopefully the vision discussion will enter into these discussions, and we're making about the future. We probably can't come up with something by December, but we can point to it on the screen and say, well, if all these things, then there's how we make decisions, and here's what the strategies need to be. It's frustrating because personally, I still believe that without a clear vision of what Cooper needs to be in the future to be sustainable, relevant, and attractive to the best and the brightest, it's difficult to plot our course as an institution. My proposal is that we continue those discussions in some concerned way with milestones in mind. My fear, and maybe that is an optimistic fear, it is unless we come up with a strategy, long and short-term strategies, but that we need to really know what we're talking about in terms of what Cooper Union should strive to be and how to keep it relevant and vital and untimely, sustainable beyond financial considerations. So that's not much of a resort, but that's my take on where we are at the moment. Are there any questions?
Lee, I would also just add insofar as how vision connects to mission and thinking about our time frame here. You know, in the beginning of the spring semester, once we have our sort of plan in place, it's likely that we'll have to alter our mission statement, which, at least currently, articulates full scholarships for all. We're sort of keeping an eye on how those two are connected, I guess. I suspect that we'll be accelerating the conversation in January, though.
I know you all want to get onto other things, but I've tried to offer something like this in the past. My own personal opinion is that the Cooper Union has the components, and at least conceptually the components, art, engineering, and art, that are the components that have been identified as the basis of design education, which is a way to look at the problems of the future as an integrated, interdisciplinary way. I see a great potential in trying to mold a vision that taps into that. There are other, bigger institutions that have already taken hold of this and are already doing what I've sort of suggested. What is the Cooper version of that? And does Cooper have to offer to that could be unique to that discussion and the direction of higher education is taking? And secondary education as well. What is Cooper's role? That could be successful, meaningful, and sustainable, functionally and practically. We don't have a truly interdisciplinary program, but we have the components of one, and we have the perceived tradition of Cooper Union being an innovative place. So how do we take those and start to mold them so that we could say, to me, tuition is still debitably in the mission statement, but is a secondary question based on the bigger questions of what kind of school it hopes to be. In relation to that, we can say, well, then based on that we could do such and such. Well, we could charge tuition, whether it's graduate, undergraduate, hybrid. But like I said before, what I got out of my education at Cooper Union is that you first have to have a concept of direction, and then you strategize based on that and make decisions, and I'll continue to argue for it until everyone tells me to go to hell.
So, any questions for Lee? Okay. On a positive note, a little bit of an aside, I want to make it official before it goes public. Jamshed and Jesse are now officially engaged to be married. That doesn't need a motion, but I second it.
Do you think someone needs to be in the meeting with him with Jesse?
There's a consideration of options. I think we discussed that. Or is there anything else that falls into that type?
Just to beat a dead horse. So what are the considerations and options that we can expect to look at in December, to vote on in December?
Well, the plan that comes back from the faculty. How to raise money, whether tuition and how much tuition will be part of that.
Here's what the faculty plans might like. Partitioning the problem school by school in terms of 2 time phases looks like the following. The School of Architecture will be starting to charge for their March 2 program, a program that has already been in existence for 5 years or so, which recruits superb students from around the world and the brand name quality already in Bowen Hills with some more marketing. We are fully anticipating that folks like the ones who are outside the door and online are going to seek to block that. They've already raised the stakes so high that it will be very difficult to actually make that successful, but we've decided we're going to charge for that program. So architecture will be first out of the box in terms of 242.56 JP, starting to actually bring some revenues in. With all but a couple of exceptions, the architecture faculty is very ambitious to take the school to a very, very new level. Being solvent is good news for those people because you can't carry out an ambition without pure money. So they're highly motivated and they're looking to shrink the size of their class and looking to launch new programs like the MArchI program, so that will be part of that story, that architecture will seek to raise revenues and shrink the undergraduate class. The undergrad tuition option will be their backstop. For art it's the same thing except it's much more, ideologically categorical. The faculty is working extremely hard to build programs like an MFA, like summer programs. For engineering, you're likely to see a mix of revenues, graduate, and other programs, as well as undergraduate tuition at some level.
Do you think you get the revenue targets for art and architecture?
In the first phase, yes. In the first 5 years.
You answer that very confidently.
We've already built a 50% risk factor into our calculations. I am confident. Am I certain? No. If it weren't for all this noise, I would be much more. Be certain. There are risks, and like anybody who starts a business or restaurant, you've got to deal with them as you go on. I think the noise is the biggest risk now, frankly, is the 245-58 JB opposition effect, who I think has decided to make it very difficult for these things to succeed. But we will overcome that without communications and information by being united. So that's what you're likely to see in December, a mix of the graduate and summer programs as well as a reduction of full scholarship policy, either as part of the mix as in an A&E arena or as a Vax 2 as in the case of art and architecture.
November 15th is the due date for each of these deans. How much time will you have to build a sense of comfort that these are attainable, and subsequently, when they give them to us in December? I guess my question is, if we collectively say that we don't think these plans feel achievable, then what's our next step there? How does that sequence of events play out?
Well, first of all, we're going to manage expectations by communications by stating that nothing is going to be communicated on December 6th. Nothing will be communicated until at least the new year and possibly beyond, because recognizing that with a 3-hour board meeting there will be a lot of follow-up questions. I will keep the executive committee informed throughout the process. It's not as if I don't know what's happening and then suddenly it's the 15th. I'm working actively with the faculty and I'll keep you alerted. The truth of the matter is that there is no college or university that does this kind of transformation on this kind of timeline. You might see that in business, but it's absolutely unheard of in education. New presidencies will typically see 18 to 24 month strategic planning process to do some move to keep the 247-40 JB institution going to the next capital campaign. We're doing an enormous favor, so we will not have all the details worked out by December 15th. I don't want to manage your expectations there. This is going to be a sketch with all the due diligence that we've been able to do, fully recognizing that first directions will be necessary on an ongoing basis, and that a lot of it will have to be dotted and T''S's will have to be crossed on an ongoing basis. What I see coming out of December is the board feeling first of all excited about the positive things in the ambitious academic programs, as well as being reassured that the long-term sustainability problem is on course. We might be taking some risks with these new programs, but the board has agreed that we can always institute a reduction of the tuition scholarship at any time, and we have separated out the short-term problem, which we will have to address.
Will you need faculty to sign off on that potential reduction of that full tuition scholarship on November 15th? Who will you get it from?
We will get it from engineering, but we may not get it from the other two schools, and the 2:50:16 JB think that my view is if they have a solid plan for phase 1, let's go with that. That's constructive enough. 5 years is a long time. The engineering faculty are already there in terms of recognizing that they might be no other tuition but tuition.
So there's a discussion at the very onset today of other options: closure, piecemeal, or completely. And Mike's idea to come up at the offsite, in which he brought up the possible buyout, partnerships attack. Am I correct that we're concentrating on November 15th and beyond first, and later looking at these other options?
No, we're looking at them in parallel. In terms of partnership, I've informed Mark that Leon Botstein had reached out to me. He's the president of BARD. He's in China now, but when he gets back, we're going to talk. As you may know, if you follow his career, he has taken over lots of failing institutions. And it's certainly a conversation worth having. Obviously, I'm not going to commit anything on behalf of 251-27 JB, the institution, but I told him we're going into this very abstractly about looking at other models. But frankly, it's worth a conversation, because what they have done is quite extraordinary at BARD. They have an MFA program in Manhattan, a very successful one. Our faculty are trying to design a very similar one. Should we compete? Should we partner with them? If they have money to bring that to the table, they will to add our attention. If they don't, it would be a harder final to Istif.
It would be a very hard thing to justify Jamshed, you're right.
Well, in terms of time frames for considering the three options, one that's in process and these other two, when does that happen? You said the research entities is ongoing. Are we characterizing the other two as longer-term partnerships?
The closure is fire under their behinds, particularly with engineering faculty. It's a tactic, it has to be prevalent.
But it's not just a threat, it's a real option.
It's a real option, and I will only recommend it if we do not have a constructive, positive way for the particular school, in which case I will say I don't see a light at the end of this tunnel, let's begin to close it down. So we're doing all the preparatory work on how we would wind down if we would on a school-by-school basis. I don't 25336 JB foresee coming into that recommendation, but the board has to consider that as a credible alternative, of course. Getting the board familiar in terms of December with the fact that we partition the problem is important. It is not likely to be one solution for all three schools, which is a new development. It is difficult for people in the Cooper community to swallow that, but the faculty have already bought into that, but I think alumni will have a harder time.
Let's take lunch.
I think that most of you ought to know that there are quite a number of students out there, so...
Are they armed?
They have fishing rods.
I just wanted to give you a heads up, you know, it's an academic institution, students.
Does anybody understand what they're trying to say with the fishing rods and the money? Fishing for money? What is it?
It's here for Foreman's Arc.
You know, we spend a lot of time talking about how to manage student demonstrations and things that can happen and trying to maintain control of them. I think I just want you to be aware as you go out there, there's a bunch of them, and I think they're going to get, you know, become more and more. It's an academic institution and students protest. That's I mean, it's a hallmark of the academy.
Do they even know that they're protesting?
I'm sure they know.
Education is a right. Welcome to 1969. I haven't been tear gassed in decades. We're gonna take a quick break, get lunch, and we'll eat as we continue.
Money for lunch.
Yeah.
Dance party? We got the money.
To come up with a plan that would total 12 million, but only 50% at, I hope that nobody says...
I wouldn't use the word raise. We're not asking the faculty to raise. What we're saying is WPRP not asking them to raise money. What we're saying is failure to agree to 5758 JB on a set of academic programs that are based on a financial model that will produce revenue. There's a subtle difference, but it's important. We're asking them to agree to programs and teach them. We're not asking them to raise money, but they have to. Are on the fact that the ORM's charge.
That the program's charged, yes.
Okay, we'll actually take a short lunch break right now. We'll be back in 60 seconds after I get water.
Oh wow, that light. What time is it right now?
The time
How long
is
has this been?
10:17.
We'll start back in 10.
Guys, to be alive in 5.
Wait, hold up.
3, 2, 1, action!
Okay, let's start up again. Can we finish eating while we go on?
Yeah.
Alright. We have a new alumni trustee, Edgar McCovas. We also have nominations for 2 new trustees on the board. One is Jeremy Wertheimer. He's an engineering grad. He sort of lost touch with us, and we sort of lost touch with him, but we rediscovered him again. He's a successful guy. He had a software company that he started when he got out of school. He's now the vice president of travel at Google. He's excited about coming back. He's already made a substantial gift to the school, and he's interested in getting our students involved in Google. I think it would be a great opportunity. We'll vote on it in December. The other one is Rachel Warren. Rachel's the daughter of Bill Warren, a very active alumni for many years. Rachel is also a link to Canbar. Maurice Cantor. She's an attorney. She's on the board of the Cardozo School. She has a lot of other experience with other boards. She's not an alum, but her dad is. I spoke with her yesterday, and she's interested, and she will serve if elected. So there's 3 nominations here. Alumni trustee and 2 trustees. Motion for that?
Who has met with these individuals at this point?
So Jeremy Wertheimer of Jamshed met him. Francois and I have met with him. Rachel hasn't been that thoroughly vetted yet. She's a strong person and she's a woman. We could use more females on this board. Can I have a motion for that?
Just one thing on Edward Mokavos, who would replace Audrey Flack as an alumni trustee. I think it's worth mentioning that we'll be using the annual meeting in December, the dinner associated with the annual meeting, to recognize the trustees that have left the board for whatever reason. Over the past year in particular. There are really a handful of them. Mark and Jamshed want to make sure that we acknowledge their efforts on Cooper's behalf.
Just to add to Ed, he was an alumni trustee. For those of you who might not know, he's nominated by our nominating committee and elected by the alumni council. He had 4 total staggered 4-year terms. He was head of our committee for several years. He stepped out of involvement over a year ago because he'd been elected to serve the school board in New Jersey, which had a lot of time commitments. I know John Shad has talked to him. He will be a good addition to the board. We have our first alumni council tomorrow. Derek Whitner will be one of the people speaking to the group. One of the main goals this year is to try to get the alumni council back on track with the crisis growing. We want to try to build the community, and that will be a long-term benefit to the school. We're working with Kat Tramwell and the alumni relations staff. She has some new additions to her staff, replacements for people who left over the summer. They're positive replacements, and we're going to get a lot more support in terms of communications from alumni. We need to start somewhere. I continue to talk briefly with John Shedd and to try to figure out how I can be, while still remaining independent. My goal is to be as supportive as I can of the tough decisions that need to be made and decisions that need to happen, and try to steer that discussion in a positive way. And it's going to be a challenge.
Any questions for Peter? Okay, a report on the development committee now.
If I could have a couple minutes, I'll be brief. Just to recap last year, 2012. I think there were some positives. We've heard and seen some of the numbers. Annual giving turned a positive result last year. 3.1 million on a goal of 2.5 million. We fought aggressively about 3 million, and we can do a little better than that. We're conservative the way we budget, but it was a good year for that. Participation was up to about 24%, a little lower than that. Participation is tough to move, but it does move last year by about 3 percentage points, and that's positive. Parent giving did move dramatically to 360,000. Sorry, I'm so choked up by the funds. From about 250,000. That's a big move for parents and a dramatically important place for us to think about the future. And just to speed this up a bit, I think a lot of the good, and I don't want to underestimate it. I also want to let you where the caution is going forward. Last year produced overall cash of almost 10 million bucks, 9.7 million. It's compromised not only for an annual giving, but of cash for all sources, whether it's government or foundation support, etc., etc. It also includes installation payments for pledges that we've been made during the campaign. The campaign is over. Last year was realized about 2.2 million is the installment payment for the campaign. This year was realized about 2.2 million in installment payments from the campaign. This year was going to make that somewhere we don't have a campaign. So that's one note of caution. The author is this. We got an anonymous gift last year, or ransom, but someone who is connected to Cooper over $1 million, and if we I checked up, sorry, just so much cash. It was cash. Cash was beginning the best we can if we wish in financial aid. That's not going to be duplicated by the person this year, that's another note. And talking about cash registers, but duplicated by the person this year, that's another note. And talking about the cash register of about $10 million, we've now seen two things that threaten the result of the cautionary notes about how we're going to address these years and going forward. What are we recently trying to do in order to address some of these concerns? If annual giving was to replace all the cash that we've be terrific, I don't think it will. Do I think aggressively? Yes. I do think we reached a naturally number of 3.1 million last year. We ought to be about 5 or 6 or 7 million that's because we don't have people paying off pledges anymore. We ought to be replacing these payments with cash payments along the way, but it doesn't happen that way without a focus of a focal point. We're also not ready for the campaign. We can't move, and everything school does this. The end of one campaign, there's already the next one done. We're not there yet. It's gonna wait. Some of the planning that John Shedd has to do, some of the outcome, these discussions, etc. What do we do in the meantime to replace the cash? What we're trying to do is come up with something that, for the purpose of this discussion, I will call a mini-campaign. For the next year or two, with an uncertain goal, but focus on several projects. One of the courses is scholarship support. Other projects are just term, but very important, effective Jamshed. For example, someone who might, in addition to an annual gift, want to give to a venture fund is Jamshed has at his disposal some money to sprinkle to give to a venture fund, as so Jamshed has at his disposal so money to sprinkle around the faculty for a project that he thinks are focused on that. We think we're about to enter a discussion with Jamshed, and we've focused on that. We think we are about to enter the discussion with Jamshed, and we've had those. We're about to unveil this in terms of publicity and the kind of campaign had those. We're about to unveil that in terms of publicity and kind of campaign. Everything about that is, this is cash. It's cash. We're not talking about endowment. The number that TC has used is figures going forward to $100 million in the capital campaign, another $30 million from the annual giving. The comprehensive $130 million, only $30 million out of that is cash. Cash! And that's cash through the 10-year period. The rest of that is endowed. The endowment pays 5%. It doesn't do what we need to do today, which is why we are all focused on cash. We're trying to raise sites. Someone gives an annual giving 5,000, 6,000. We're trying to raise that. How do we do that? If you're offering a recognition to people to do specific gifts about or above a certain amount, we're starting at 10,000 payable in a year, and we're going to 25 to 50 to $100,000. We do have some $100,000 annual donors. If we can offer recognition of people and honor them in a certain way in which we're working on. We're hoping to raise sites so that 7 I wish it was million, but it's 7,000 donations, 10,000 dollars this year, etc. It's all we can do as a placeholder for real campaign. Professorships or faculty support, ordinarily, you pay out of endowment for those. A $3 million endowment with a payout to payment somebody to occupy a professorship. We're not thinking that way. We're thinking about pay in, pay out. If you're going enough to give a pledge of $3,000, $5,000 or more, even over a period of 3 to 5 years, we will put someone in your professorship at Cooper for the time. It doesn't mean we will do it in your perpetuity as most professorships would do. This is short term. We rotate it after the 3 or 5 year period of that faculty member is of great repute and does well. Here then we'll think of that next stage to keep the faculty member. All of our thinking has to be that way right now. That staff knows it. We're all dedicated to doing that, but there are disadvantages to that. Most people who give large gifts want to be recognized forever. This is simply that way it goes, whether ego or whatever. Family name, we can't afford that. We're not offering that right now. It's also in the current interest of Cooper to not offer that. Ultimately, we have to. The long-term health of an institution depends on, of current giving and endowment giving. The endowment giving is the piece that we're challenging right now. The staff is focused. It's though to keep morale up, but I think they're true professionals. I think we're being extremely lucky. We've hired their true professionals. I think we've been extremely lucky. We've hired some very good people who are dedicated to making things work in the midst of all this turmoil, and there are plenty that comes out of there every day. We want to hold our own in the next year or two till we go into the bridge of the future. That's what this is about, and that's what fundraising is about. The other initiative that I think is critical, and I ask all of you to think about it, is essential to the health of this place. Is there very is the very board. We have to keep building a board, and we're dedicated to doing that. We need to find and attract the most solid people who can, to this board, form a diverse background. Without a doubt, but people who are also committed financially to supporting Cooper. The next campaign was started in the silent phase with the board. It's support you don't do the most. Most campaigns and with the board contributing 20 to 30% of the campaign total. This board contributes something like 12% last time around. That can't happen. So we are dedicated over the next 2 years to building a board. There's some good signs out there. Jamshed and I are having meetings with people who we think can lead to others and engage with people in the board, the leadership at Cooper. If any of you can help us along the road, please do. Don't hesitate for a moment. Give me a call and I say, Derek, I know so-and-so. We'll need the introduction. If we don't know the person, we'll need a strategic plan to get to that person. We need as many people people thinking about this as possible. That's all I can say at this point. I'll take any questions if you have any.
So, please come up with some names for Derek to work on.
The best spokesperson for development over the last 2 years, she is not here, as you all know. Jeff is the co-chair of the development committee. If anybody wants to think about leadership of that, please take your conversations to Mark, Francois, or to Jamshed or me. Please, we need as much leadership and advocacy among these groups and beyond the group as we can get.
As we updated the plan, you probably saw an operating budget and a more landscape budget. My bottom line is always cash in the bank. The expected course of endowment, the current forecast for the end of fiscal 2013 is actually up almost $2 million from what it was previously. The permanently restricted endowment is actually down about $5 million, so we're worse off, but in terms of liquidity, we're a little better off. I don't think this changes anything, but we need to talk about in this slide. There's a lot of details in here that we can respond to.
Tom, did you say that permanent is down $5 million?
Versus the estimate of what it was going to be, the endowment giving for fiscal 12, we trued up about $3 million versus the expected, and the forecast for 13 is about $3 million less than expected. So with rounding, you know, -3 and -5.
There's a line item, September update. There were a lot of other demands on cash, which was set out, restricted expenses, and this was modeled. Also restricted donations?
Look here, Mike, this is the long discussion we had with accounting, with an external accounting expert. Look at the financial statement, and correct me if I state this wrong, and take into account restricted dollars, both in the income and outcome side. As long as those net out over time, you're doing okay with that. But there's tiny differences where I might give you restricted cash this year, and you might spend it next year. Take 3, you might spend more than is incoming, so this is meant to correspond more closely to the accounting, but it shouldn't change the substance of a financial position. You see, a little bit as you net these things out over a couple $100,000 one way or the other, or over time they should net out. Assuming that the restricted gifts actually show up over time. Sometimes it's a pledge, so you might not true up entirely. So this is an attempt to tidy the account numbers. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's a fair statement.
Anyone have questions on that? Okay, budget overview.
There are ups and downs with the budget numbers. I think for the fiscal 13, actually, there's a couple things in here that the $386,000 decrease in total revenues, and on the expense side, it's just a capital expenditure to move from one year to the other, and then we have the cash thing we just talked about.
Cash.
So a couple $100,000 here and there is nothing that meaningful.
Okay. Can we have an investment update? John?
Listen, I have a request. I looked at the numbers and I saw that our year-over-year investment return was negative. I sent a response to an email that came back from John Michelson, and it said it would actually be useful to have a sense to track over time how we've done with our cumulative and annualized returns that have been. I don't know if it's a good strategy or not. It seems like every time that I've looked at the report, it's more bad news than good news. I don't know if we all feel the same way.
I think those numbers in there that you're looking for, that give you kind of compact returns.
I'm saying 10 years back or something. Do we have a good long term? I understand the returns fluctuate, and so therefore you wind up saying that it was a crappy period here, but a good period there. What I'm trying to figure out is that for over long periods of time, are we good stewards of our endowment?
Well, since inception, we track. We track current month, fiscal year, calendar year, 3-year, 5-year, all since inception. And more than last year is on page 5 or 6 of that report.
Not everyone gets that report, but we can distribute that.
I would suggest it's a good idea to keep in front of the board a snapshot of how we're doing with our investing.
Well, how about this, Stan? Rather than presenting a one-pager that gives you a snapshot, how about we just simply replace that with the full Cambridge report, which shows you over the past...
Well, we'll get that for you, that one pager that gives you all the information, and then you can have the dense report if you want it.
I think it's really important that everyone get that, all those who are interested. Over the years, it's perplexed. I don't actually know the answer to the question if we're doing a good job versus if he does or not.
When you do see the report, you'll each ask if benchmarked against the appropriate benchmarking asset bonds, and some of the numbers are kind of odd numbers because you may benchmark bonds against some odd index, and you may benchmark each of your investments against a different flavor of bonds, so you might actually outperform or underperform the benchmark, so we'll give you some granularity.
Listen, that doesn't answer my question though, which is how are we doing? My question is of interest to those who manage the portfolio. For those of us who are investing, it is, are we just better off not buying long bonds, or are we, you know?
Well, I missed the investment meetings. So
That's a question that gets talked about every time they meet. 1 year is not good, 3-year or 5-year is good. And even since inception, I I say better than a benchmark. Any kind of investment in the short term.
I'm not interested in the short term. It's a long-term strategy.
Right, Stan. But a point of fact, in the past fiscal year, we were down 4.8%. Now that was better than we had originally forecasted because the market improved.
Underperform up markets and outperform down markets with a more conservative position. We have some international assets here, so you know, the international markets underperformed U.S. equity markets this year, so we'll underperform U.S. stocks indices this year.
Any questions? Should we adjourn?
Well, Mark, if I could have a second. Bringing the food in, I was reminded that we have 2 potential exits to exit the space. There's obviously the front door, which is great, I guess. But for those of you who don't necessarily want to be, shall we say, trapped, I'm going to go over and open up this door. But I'm not guaranteeing that you won't get stopped.
What's on their minds?
You know the same thing that's been on them.
Actually, reading their posts on Facebook about this meeting encouraged people to come. They are concerned that they'd be grandfathered. It's not clear to them that their tuition will remain full tuition scholarships, and they just want you to know how strongly they feel.
158 The discussion about closure turned to, are we going to phase out some of the classes, some of the students are going to have to transfer. It was only years ago we had this discussion. It was always under circumstances that if we were going to close down anything, that every student who's already admitted will get the benefit of the full tuition scholarship for the remaining time here, and that we would never force students to transfer. That's the right thing to do if you're going to do it, rather than to decide that a student who's a sophomore or junior suddenly has to transfer. I'm curious as to why that thinking changed so dramatically from where it was years ago.
Well, it hasn't changed. I mean, I'd assured the students and faculty that certainly through the class and Tirana in 2013 it will not change.
So we'll get 4 years?
Well, there is that ambiguity whether it's 1 year or 4 years. It would be nice to be able to assure them that it's 4 years. I would think that we'll revise this over time. The only thing that's changed is I got the sense very early on that the board was looking for rapid, drastic, decisive action, and we talked about a 4-year wind down and for architecture 5 years. That's not unintelligible, and so I believe the most prudent thing to do for the long term is to assure the 4 years for the class of 2013. That gives us this extra year to get our decision made and has the least risk of depriving the students of education. But my sense is that the board has been looking for action sooner rather than later. I would rather we not be making big decisions in December. Why not make them at the end of next May? But it seemed to me the board wanted to make them this past June. The clearer the communication we give about the resolution of the short-term problem, the more time it gets us to do things in a logical way that doesn't cause panic. So, if that's the sense of the board, I'd love to be able to just assure the current and incoming student 1H, LHETVLLCJSD through the freshman class income in 2013 nothing will change for them.
My personal opinion being it would be unconscionable to change the approach while students are still here.
But you have to realize that in any wind-down plan, if you're assuring students that they can have the 3 or 4 more years they need to graduate, that means you don't get the savings from closing down the operation. And you may be able to close down portions, but the savings are not going to kick in until past 2018 when we have the leap in the rent anyway. It will certainly help us all, I think, to focus on coming up with good plans that are academically ambitious and actually sustainable, visionary, if we take some of the panic out of the equation. I love to come out of the meeting with this sense.
Can we do that and promise money that we do have, or are we promising to spend money that we don't have?
I think that's why what TC did is so important. Maybe we should just spend a few minutes discussing those options. Why don't we put the students on the screen?
Let's spend some time on this. It's a very important discussion. I don't want there to be any disputes about this going down because our admissions people need clear direction. We're in the midst of the early decision cycle already, admitting students, and what do we say? I think the best thing for the future health and vitality of the institution is to not act precipitously even if we have to act expeditiously. So can we say to the class coming in 2013 that you are also granted? I think that's what we said in our April announcement, that class will not be affected, with some ambiguity in the sentence about whether that's for 4 years. Now some people online have already wielded that interpretation. I would rather we say sure, because the tuition is not going to impact the shape of it's too late for that. One way or the other, we can't do an UA with the money. I just don't see them.
So what do we do with the numbers, say TC?
Well, based on what? You close. When?
Yeah.
I'm just confused here because there's 2 different discussions. One is charging tuition for next year's class, and the other is closing the school down and the problems with that.
I thought the question was... Oh, I see. Yes, that's right. Both questions are important.
Right. I think both questions are important. Closing the schools down in the end, I agree with Vicus, is really disruptive for the students and therefore I think would probably hurt the school in the long term. To say even after 1 year you gotta go and transfer and do things you didn't want to do and try and find aid with whatever. On the other hand, you gotta wonder what the place is going to be like for a discontinued program in the last year and the next to the last year. What professors are going to hang around to do that? It won't be easy, and it should be fleshed out sooner rather than later so we know what it will be.
To be honest here, TC and I about 3 to 6 months ago were thinking you have to do it cold turkey and close. Firing faulty is the kind of thing corporations do. You know you have until 5 o'clock to clear out, and here's your severance, and that's it, and we somehow transfer the students out. We couldn't envision how you can carry out a strong academic program with faculty and staff leaving and getting fired, staying on for another year simply to do this. The thing that turned us around on that is students, the welfare of students. We simply have to manage the faculty side of it. It's not going to pretty.
It's not going to be very pretty.
I don't know if this question has any relevance, but when I was here, I think it was freshman year or my sophomore year, there was a decision made to close the mathematics and physics major.
I think the solution at the end of the day was that you protected upperclassmen, but not the lower levels. I can't remember. Certainly freshmen were not protected. I don't know what happened to sophomores. I think there's an in-between solution instead of 4 years.
In that case, they transferred out their majors and they were still offering math and physics, so it was easier and conceivably closer to civil engineering option. Which, as a civil engineer, I'm not sure I'd advocate, considering the freshmen aren't that invested in their major. It's easier than closing the art school completely or something like that, or the engineering school completely.
We can go back. I mean, we do have plenty of institutional memory about that. Alan Wolf himself had to leave, but it was a lot easier given that it was 1 or 2 departments. We're talking about an entire school, if not the entire institution. Even that was dramatic enough, and that's what produced the creation of the full-time faculty meeting.
The idea of the discussion isn't to stay open for the whole 4 years, so for the freshmen to be pleased, it would be hard to stay open for 4 years in itself while simultaneously balancing the costs.
Yeah, the one thing we all have to recognize in this situation is that there is no easy path. From a rational standpoint, it is really not clear that there are any paths at all. I think we have come a long way this past year in trying to find pathways. I do believe there are pathways that enable us coming out of this stronger than before. We may have to give on some highly valued constraints, but any of the options we consider are going to have execution risks. They're going to be very difficult to actually execute. You're going to see a lot more of what you see outside the door. Will you charge or will you close? Will you create a new program if people are opposed to expansion? That's just one of the things on the list. Every path is going to be controversial and fraught with uncertainties. I think there's a distinction between setting a policy, making policy-level decisions, and execution on the ground, which requires a lot of document tactic, sort of like football. You say, this is going to be the play, then once the play begins you have to improvise because somebody punches you and blocked you and tripped you and then you fall. So we're aware of just how difficult any of these things is going to be. I wanted, before we close, to have a conversation about how we adjourn as gracefully as possible and exit, given this. I think that the group outside represents it's not representative of the student body, but it's a group that's very passionate. Many of them are ill-informed or misinformed, and many of those are not ever likely to be, because they don't understand. Are there any art graduates in the room? As an art graduate with an engineer's brain. So he doesn't really care. Ones who are quantitatively receptive are coming along. The kinds of spreadsheets that you see here are extremely complicated, and Cooper Union's finances are an order of magnitude more complicated than any other institution because of this weird step function every 10 years of rents. How do you calculate the deficit when expenses go up exponentially with inflation and revenues go like that, crisscrossing? It's very, very real, but that strikes this group as obfuscation is the term they use. They're obviously confusing us, so there must be something they're hiding. There must be something trying to get away with. It must be a cover-up to turn the institution into NYU, to gouge those students, to expand. For many of those students, you can't get mad at them because they believe that, and it's very much influenced by the Occupy movement, and there were unconscionable things done by leaders in the financial world. No offense to anybody in this room, but there are reasons to be mad. But there's a difference between being mad in a blanket sort of way and having specific goals. That's probably why the Occupy movement hasn't been able to follow through. I think these students are very frustrated because they don't really have a handle, and they're being influenced by some people who do have a handle, but who see political gain in this. Not all of them will be brought around. I think some of them will be brought around. There's also the ones who tend to be protesting have a certain political view that meetings of people, mostly men, in dark suits and closed boardrooms are inherently suspect. So when I was out there, the main man goes, "Why aren't we all in here? Why can't they all just be in here?" No answer really will convince. You can say, as I did, we have democratic procedures. You elect your student leaders to the Senate and they go to faculty meetings and academic affairs, the trustee committee. There are avenues, but they want to know why they are not in this room. There are two ways to think about the exit strategy. One is we go out the back, in which case that becomes the story on Facebook, or we go out front, in which case that becomes the story on Facebook. Which story do we want? I think there are loads of problems to each. The ideal would be we go out front, we try to shake hands and walk through. The con is, how do you get out the other end? Because you'll be peppered with questions. It's human to want to engage, and I think there's some goodwill that you get from engaging and keeping that humanity. But then want answers.
Jump Shed. They make no effort. Some of us walked in and out a couple of times. They made no effort to communicate in any way. You think when we all leave, they'll be more vociferous?
There is a mass exodus at the end of the meeting. It's different than just going to the bathroom. They may not be ready to capture you just going to the bathroom. We are pretty involved with students. I'm sure you've all been through, like you said, 1968 or 19 whatever it is era. There are no graceful ways of bridging between power and the perception of powerlessness. It is mostly art students, a sprinkling of architecture and engineering students, mostly art students who perceive this as about power. The 1% versus the 99%. Most art students don't feel that they have much stake in the establishment. That's why there's mostly the engineer's view, and it's also reflected in this board, right? We have a few minutes, and I do think the Arua needs to feel comfortable about what we're all going to do as we exit.
Let's just say we'll have to go to the bathroom.
John, just to note, you offered them a meeting with you and at another point. Maybe we should be aware of that. And what is that?
They acknowledge that we have been open to individual meetings that they can sign up for and so on. They're saying, how about a meeting of the full student body? That's fine. We can do it during club hours. Right off the bat, they seem very receptive to that. Some of them are very civil and don't think there is anything nefarious going on. They just want more information or reassurance, and others believe we're lying. There's nothing we can say. When someone believes you're lying, it doesn't matter what you say. They'll go, you're lying about lying and all that stuff. You'll never get out of that. There's another thing. Boards tend to be disproportionately analytical people because analytical people are the ones who tend to be more successful in traditional ways and finally pay the bills. This is not a particularly analytical issue out there. It's more symbolic, it's emotional and about understanding how they feel, right? So going out in a humane way is the way to do it. So, I don't know, is going out the back door the way to do it?
I'm just suggesting, for those people who might have a time constraint.
I think we need to go out the front. Vicus is coming.
If Vicus doesn't come back, we'll go out the back way.
Would another option be to actually invite them in here for 10 minutes?
I'd be in favor of that personally.
Any discussion of that?
Ask them to set a prerequisite.
To make a presentation, not to ask questions.
Yeah, not to ask questions, to tell us what they're thinking, but not ask questions. I'd be in favor of that.
Then I think it's important to set some rules up from the very beginning. Let's put a time limit on it, say? Any other thoughts about what the rules could be? I certainly think it's a great way to make peace.
Maybe we say we will listen respectfully, but we won't respond. Unless you want to respond, I think that will be okay.
I think any talking needs to be done by the president, not by us.
You want them to come in one at a time, or?
They can come in as a group.
The advantage of them coming in also is that it clears out.
I'd also suggest, please just make sure your papers are put away.
If there are any empty seats, feel free to take them.
Come on in. Come on.
Freeze, air, and water! Freeze, air, and water! Freeze, air, and water! Freeze, air, and water!
Freeze, air, and water! Education's a human right!
If there are any empty seats, feel free to take them.
Cooper!
No names? Would it be helpful to leave the name tags, everyone?
Oh, we can have each person introduce themselves.
So, 30 years ago, I was on the floor, and just like you guys, and now I got a chair.
Do we want to do introductions? Students respond, yes, we're here in class. Why don't we start at the end?
Yes, why don't we start at the end?
Yeah.
Don Blaueis, Art 61. Ray Falsey, Engineering 86.
And you're an alumni
And you're an
trustee.
alumni trustee, elected by alumni, and just came on.
I'm Lee Skolnick, Architecture 79, and alumni trustee.
Peter Capiero, Civil Engineering 83, and President of the Alumni Association.
I'm Mark Epstein. I'm chairman of the board, graduated 76 from Vermont.
Francois Dimenel, Architecture 87.
Richard Linser. I'm not an alumnus, but my father was an engineering alumnus, class of 42.
Tom Driscoll, Engineering 77.
Go, Ronnie.
Engineering 61.
TC Westcott, not a board member. I'm the Vice President of Finance and Administration.
Lawrence Cacciatore. I'm secretary to the Board of Trustees.
And I'm Sherry Wills. I'm a professor of art history at the University of Rhode Island. I'm here for 1 year as an American Council of Education Fellow. I'm not a board member. I'm here for 1 year
If
as an
you
American
want
Council of
anybody, feel free to speak. Or if you want to elect some spokespeople, the important thing is to express. Or if you want to elect some spokespeople, the important thing is to express.
The end.
Cut! No.